The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Jordan unlocked the front door to the convenience store, the cold night air biting against his face. Inside, the space smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee, a familiar yet unwelcome scent that clung to his clothes long after his shifts ended. It was 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes to clock in. Jordan dropped his bag behind the counter and glanced at the schedule pinned to the corkboard. No changes, as always. It was just him working the graveyard shift. The usual customers were predictable: the occasional taxi driver, insomniacs in need of cigarettes, or a few sketchy individuals who didn't stay long. He could handle them, he thought. The parking lot was quiet as he stepped outside for a cigarette. It had been weeks since the mugging he witnessed out here, but the memory of the man's screams still made his stomach churn. He lit the cigarette with a shaky hand, his eyes scanning the shadows instinctively. That's when he saw it, a figure standing under the street lamp on the far side of the lot. The person was wearing a wolf costume, though costume was a generous term. The fur was matted and torn, stained with something dark, and the headpiece hung slightly askew, making its face hard to see. The figure didn't move, even when Jordan stared at it, seriously. Jordan muttered, flicking his cigarette to the ground and stepping inside. Pranks weren't uncommon around here, but there was something unsettling about the stillness of that costume. He shook it off though, thinking little of it as the clock struck midnight. 2 nights later, the figure returned. Jordan noticed him immediately, standing just a few feet closer than before, on the edge of the cracked asphalt. Again, the wolf-costumed man didn't move, didn't speak. Jordan tried not to let it bother him. He busied himself with stacking shelves and pretending not to glance out the window every few minutes. Customers came and went, none of them noticing the figure, or if they did, they didn't say anything. As the hours crept by, the store itself seemed to take on a sinister edge. Items Jordan knew he had stocked earlier in the shift were suddenly out of place. A jar of pickles lay shattered in an aisle he hadn't even entered. At 3 a.m., he checked the security cameras. The grainy footage showed nothing out of the ordinary in the parking lot. No sign of the wolf-costumed man. Yet, when Jordan looked up from the monitor, the figure was standing closer. His heart raced. Picking up the store's phone, he called the local police. They arrived 20 minutes later, but the figure was gone by the time they pulled into the lot. "Have you ever heard of the Wolf Man?" an older customer asked Jordan the next night, while ringing up a 6-pack of beer. Jordan froze. "Wolf Man," the man laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Yeah, some local legend. Some guy who used to do kids' parties or something. They say he went crazy. Started robbing houses wearing that costume. That's just a story, right?" Jordan asked. "Sure," the man said, though his tone carried doubt. "But people talk about seeing him around here, mostly at night." Just standing there, Jordan's shift stretched on, each minute feeling heavier than the last. He tried to distract himself by searching online, finding scant details about the so-called Wolfman. A few articles mentioned a man in a wolf costume involved in petty theft years ago, but he had supposedly disappeared without a trace. At 4 a.m., the back door rattled violently. Jordan rushed to check, but no one was there. The lock, however, was scratched, as if clawed by something sharp. The following night, Jordan came prepared. A crowbar from the storeroom rested behind the counter, just in case. The wolf-costumed figure appeared shortly after midnight, this time standing at the very edge of the parking lot. Jordan locked the doors, but it did little to calm him. Every noise in the store, the hum of the freezer, the rustle of a bag of chips, seemed amplified. A loud crash echoed from the back room. Jordan ran to investigate and found the storage shelves overturned. Scratches covered the walls, jagged and deliberate, but there was no sign of anyone else. Returning to the counter, he looked out the glass doors. The figure was standing just a few feet away now, its head tilted as though watching him. Jordan's pulse thundered as he turned the lock, desperate to confront the figure. But when he opened the door, the man in the costume was gone. By now, Jordan's nerves were frayed. He barely slept during the day, haunted by thoughts of the wolf costume and the growing sense that he was being watched. That night, the figure returned, standing directly in front of the glass doors. It raised one hand and dragged its claws down the glass, leaving streaks of something dark behind. "Get the hell out of here," Jordan yelled, gripping the crowbar. His shout echoed through the empty lot, but the figure didn't flinch. Summoning courage he didn't know he had, Jordan stepped outside, brandishing the crowbar. The figure turned and walked away into the shadows, but the sound of footsteps behind Jordan made him freeze. Barricading himself in the back room, Jordan reviewed the security footage again, hoping for answers. To his horror, the cameras showed only him, yelling, swinging the crowbar at empty air. The wolf-costumed figure was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly, memories he had buried resurfaced, the mugging he witnessed weeks ago, the man screaming for help, and Jordan doing nothing. He had stood frozen, paralyzed by fear. The wolf costume now felt symbolic, a predator feeding on his guilt and inaction. The store plunged into darkness, the power cutting out completely. Heavy breathing filled the room as Jordan clutched the crowbar, his knuckles white. The wolf-costumed figure emerged from the shadows, moving unnaturally. Its voice, guttural and warped, taunted Jordan, forcing him to confront the truth about his past. Swinging wildly, Jordan fought back, smashing shelves and mirrors. The creature seemed unbothered, its movements only growing more erratic as it fed on his fear. In a desperate move, Jordan faced the figure head-on, yelling, "I'm not afraid of you." The wolf hesitated, its form flickering, before collapsing into nothingness. The first rays of dawn illuminated the wreckage of the store. Jordan staggered outside, his breath fogging in the cold morning air. He quit that day, packing up and leaving town for good. Months later, in a quieter city, Jordan started over. But one night, while closing his new store, he noticed a shadow beneath a flickering street lamp. It was a familiar figure in a ragged wolf costume. Though terror gripped him, Jordan turned away, refusing to give it power. As he walked home, the shadow lingered behind, taking a single step closer.